Turin, Italy. January 3rd, 1889. A man walks out of his lodgings on the Via Carlo Alberto. He has been living here for months, writing at a furious pace. That year alone, he finished 4 books. His mind, by every account of people who knew him, was operating at a level that frightened even him. He reaches a piazza. A horse is being whipped by its owner. The man runs toward the horse. He throws his arms around its neck. He collapses. He never wrote another publishable word. For the next 11 years, until his death in 1900, Friedrich Nietzsche lived in complete mental disintegration, cared for first by doctors, then by his mother, then by his sister. The man who wrote more clearly than almost anyone in history about the dangers of looking too long into the abyss had been looking into it for years. Now here is the question I could not stop thinking about. What exactly did he do wrong? Nietzsche was not the man who looked away from darkness. He was the man who looked directly at it, who made it the center of his life's work, and yet he was the one it consumed. 50 years later, a Swiss psychiatrist named Carl Jung spent 5 years trying to figure out exactly why. And what he found is the most important thing I've ever learned about how we survive the darkness inside love. Nietzsche's warning. In 1886, in Beyond Good and Evil, Aphorism 146, Nietzsche wrote, "Whoever fights monsters should see to it that in the process he does not become a monster. And if you gaze long into an abyss, the abyss also gazes into you." Most people quote this and stop there. They treat it as a warning against obsession. Do not stare too long at what hurt you. Move on. Be strong. In relationships, that warning has a very specific shape. It looks like staying busy, not letting yourself sit too long with what happened. Getting back out there before you have actually processed anything. In attachment science, this has a formal name. Mario Mikulincer at Bar Ilan University and Philip Shaver at the University of California, Davis documented it in their 2003 paper in Advances in Experimental Social Psychology. They call it deactivating strategies. When the attachment system is activated by pain or threat, some people respond by suppressing the signal. Block the emotional need. Maintain the outward appearance of control. Disengage. Short-term, the distress readings drop. You feel calmer. But their research shows consistent impairment in one specific area, the clarity of emotional self-awareness. Avoidant individuals show reduced access to their own emotional states. They cannot name what they are feeling because they have trained themselves not to look. The irony is exact. The instruction to look away from the abyss becomes, in practice, the instruction to lose access to your own interior life. And you cannot connect with another person from that place. You cannot love from a room where you cannot find the lights. So you might think the answer is to just look. To feel everything, not pull back. That is also not it. What Jung said instead. Jung read Nietzsche's Zarathustra at 23 and described it in his autobiography, Memories, Dreams, Reflections, as a tremendous experience, one that overwhelmed him. He was also immediately frightened because Nietzsche had something Jung recognized, a second self, a figure that arose from the unconscious and spoke through the person. Jung had the same thing, and seeing what happened to Nietzsche, he wrote that the possibility of his own interior life following the same path filled him with, his exact words, a terror which for a long time I refused to admit. In his collected works, Volume 9I, The Archetypes and the Collective Unconscious, Jung defined the shadow as the part of the personality you refused to be. The emotions you were told were unacceptable. The grief you have been carrying as irritability. The longing buried under productivity. The part of you that still loves someone you are performing as being over. His argument, what you refuse to see in yourself does not disappear. It runs the relationship from underground. It picks your partners. It recreates the dynamics you thought you had escaped in a new relationship, with a new face, with the same wound at the center. In Volume 12, Psychology and Alchemy, he used the language of alchemy to describe the first stage of genuine transformation. The Nigredo, the blackening. The material must be broken down completely before it can become something new. In relationships, the Nigredo is the full acknowledgement of what you lost, what you wanted, what it cost you. Most people skip it. They perform recovery and then wonder why, years later, the same thing is happening again. But Jung was not prescribing that you stare at the pain until it consumes you. That is the distinction. And to understand it, you need to know what he found when he spent 5 years studying Nietzsche's collapse. The thing about Nietzsche. Between 1934 and 1939, Carl Jung ran 86 private seminars on Nietzsche's Zarathustra. The transcripts run to over 1,500 pages. Princeton University Press published them in 1988. 86 seminars, 5 years, on one book. This was not academic interest. Jung was studying Nietzsche the way you study a catastrophe that almost happened to you. In one of the early sessions, he makes his diagnosis explicit. Nietzsche fell victim to the contents, which he himself had conjured up. That is a clinician looking at a colleague's wreckage and identifying exactly where the system failed. Nietzsche did not avoid the darkness. He stared into it for years. He built his entire philosophy around the idea that most people refused to look at what he was brave enough to face. And then the darkness took him. Not because he looked without a container to hold what he found. I want to be honest about one thing. The exact cause of Nietzsche's breakdown in 1889 is medically contested. Syphilis is the most widely documented clinical diagnosis in his case records, but what Jung was pointing to was not the medical cause. It was something psychological that was visible long before the collapse. Nietzsche had no container for what he was finding. He had the depth, he had the abyss. He did not have a structure strong enough to hold the material while he examined it. Jung's own account of what he did differently is in Chapter 6 of Memories, Dreams, Reflections. In December 1913, he sat at his desk and deliberately descended into his own unconscious. He documented the visions, the inner figures, the voices that were not his own. That material became the Red Book. He came back intact, with the theory of depth psychology that would shape the rest of the century. Nietzsche had the same material. He did not come back. The container, that is the missing piece. The attachment translation. This maps directly onto what is happening in your relationships right now. The avoidant response is Nietzsche's warning applied to attachment. Look away, keep moving. Mikulincer Shaver's research confirms exactly what this costs. Impaired emotional clarity, reduced capacity for intimacy, and the suppressed material generating the same relational dynamics underground. The avoidant person does not escape the wound. They stop being able to see it while it runs the show. But the anxious response is not Jung's prescription. The anxious person does not integrate the darkness. They dissolve into it. They lose themselves in the grief, in the need for the other person to make the pain stop. That is not the darkness with a container. That is the darkness as the whole container. Mary Main, at the University of California, Berkeley, found the third path in her 1985 adult attachment interview research. She identified a category she called earned secure, not secure by inheritance. Earned. These were adults from genuinely painful early histories, abandonment, neglect, betrayal, and yet they showed up in adulthood with the fullest capacity for intimacy of any group she studied. Better than people who had simply had easy childhoods. They had looked at their history directly, with enough internal structure to survive the looking, and processed it into something they could carry. They went in, and they came back. That is the container. Frankl's living proof. Let me show you what that looks like. Viktor Frankl was marching. Before dawn, frozen ground, being driven toward the worksite in the dark, guards shouting, his feet in poor condition. He wrote it later in Man's Search for Meaning, published in 1946. He describes the scene. Grey was the sky above, grey the snow in the pale light of dawn, grey the rags in which my fellow prisoners were clad, and grey their faces. He was not performing optimism. He was not looking away. He was in it completely. And in the middle of that march, he turned his mind toward his wife, Tilly Grosser. They had married in 1941, among the last Jewish couples permitted to wed in Nazi-controlled Vienna, separated when the transports came. He did not know if she was alive. He writes, "I was again conversing silently with my wife. In a last violent protest against the hopelessness of imminent death, I sensed my spirit piercing through the enveloping gloom. A bird landed in front of him on the frozen soil. A light came on in a distant farmhouse." He writes, "I understood how a man who has nothing left in this world still may know bliss, be it only for a brief moment, in the contemplation of his beloved." He was holding both, the grey, the cold, the guards, the threat of death, and Tilly, both in the room. Neither collapsed into the other. That is the container Jung was describing. Tilly died of typhus at Bergen-Belsen. Frankl did not learn this until after liberation. He had been holding her image for months without knowing she was already gone. He wrote Man's Search for Meaning in 9 days, dictated to a team of assistants. It has sold over 16 million copies in 50 languages. Because what he documented is not philosophy. It is a record of what it looks like when a human being holds the full darkness and the full love simultaneously and comes back to tell the rest of us what they found. The third path. So here is where this lands. Nietzsche gave you a real warning. He gave it from inside the failure he was trying to describe. Look away, and you go avoidant, losing access to your own interior life, while the wound runs the relationship underground. He was right about the danger, but the answer was not simply to look. Jung's Red Book period, Frankl's Frozen March, Maine's Earned Secure Adults. They are all describing the same thing from different angles. You need the container first, then you look. The container is not a theory. It is the practice of holding yourself present while you let the full weight of what happened actually land, not explaining it away, not deciding what it means before you have felt what it is. Just, I see this, I am still here. Tell me what you are. The avoidant person never gets to ask the question. The anxious person never gets to wait for the answer. The earned, secure person, the person Frankl became, asks the question and stays in the room long enough to hear what comes back. Jung called this individuation. Becoming the person you actually are, rather than the person who survived by not looking. There is something you have been not thinking about, something you reach for the phone to avoid. You know exactly what it is because you know which thought you redirect when it starts to surface. That is the abyss. Not a metaphor. That is the specific material waiting to be looked at. Nietzsche told you to be careful. He was right. Frankl showed you it is survivable. He proved it in the worst conditions available to a human being. And Jung spent 60 years building the map of how to go in and come back. The darkness in your love is not the enemy. It is the part of the story that has not been told yet. You have the map now. Go tell it.